Greetings, family. Welcome to the HO Network on YouTube. This is your host, Dia Nunez, and I'm with our family members, Rob and Trish MacGregor, who have written many books on the elements of synchronicity. And y'all, let me tell y'all something. They have a new book called Synchronicity Highway, and I would call it Synchronicity Superhighway, because as you know, if you've listened to the HO Network, we've been talking about all of these portals that have been opening astrologically and things of this nature in the multi-layered reality in which we live. And this book is right on time because it expands on so many things. I want to welcome Trish and Rob MacGregor. Welcome to the HO Network, family.
Thank you, Dia.
Thank you. Hi.
Well, I just have to say, I love your books on synchronicity. I would imagine that as you guys have written your blog that you never would have imagined the places that it has taken you. You've written 4 books, 5, including this one on the elements of synchronicity. Amazing is all I have to say, is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love this book. This was fun to do.
I mean, where do I even begin? You started with the blog. Did you even imagine that this little peephole into Alice in Wonderland would take you to writing all of these books on synchronicity? It looks like once you open one door, like 100 of them open right behind it.
It's definitely true. I mean, the people who contributed stories too have really helped expand our knowledge of synchronicity.
Yeah, we opened the blog as a means of research for our first book, but we never knew that we were going to continue and expand and do more and more of these. And that I figured at the beginning, well, one synchronicity book, that should be
that should be it.
But no, that's not the case. We moved on to synchronicity on the other side, and then Aliens in the Backyard, which deals with synchronicity, and now our new one.
I tell you, as soon as I picked up this book, I could not put it down. And I think it's because where I stand in my reality and my life in spiritual development and growth as a human being. And I know others who have read this book as well who are saying the same thing. Do you see that the element of synchronicity is increasing at a rapid pace? It has in my life. Has it in yours and other people that you have observed?
Absolutely. And it seems that the more aware people become of it, the more frequently they experience it. That without awareness, it's just a random coincidence. But once you bring awareness into the equation, then the whole thing changes.
Absolutely, it does.
We just have, synchronicities happening to us on a daily basis. There are forms of guidance. Like, for example, this morning I went out on a bike ride. I'm a mountain biker. I go out on a trail.
No mountains in Florida, though.
But so I'm on this trail. I'm usually with a friend, but because I had a dentist appointment, I couldn't make it on our usual day yesterday. So today, Wednesday, I went out by myself. And there's a new cut in the trail that's a more advanced kind of expert level that I had a little trouble on the last couple of times I was there. And I was thinking, well, should I take this or not? Or should I just continue on in the moderate path here? And I had my iPod on. I was actually listening to a song by the Grateful Dead called The Ripple. And just as I thought about that, the lyrics are, if you fall, you are alone.
So he didn't take that.
So I took that as guidance and continued straight ahead.
I'm wondering how this book came about. Well, first of all, because family, if you haven't gone back into the archives and listened to our synchronicity shows, you must do so. But for those who are joining us for the first time, what do you coin as synchronicity, if you will?
Okay. For us, it's the coming together of inner and outer events in a way that can't be explained by cause and effect, and it's meaningful to the person who experiences it. That's basically what it is. It's meaningful coincidence.
Do you think that when you say superhighway, what do you mean by synchronicity superhighway?
Well, if you're on the synchronicity highway, you're exactly where you should be. Okay? Because you're living with an awareness that everything is connected.
Yeah. There's like an underlying web of reality that connects everything. And it's called Indra's net in Hinduism. And synchronicities are really the most conscious aspect of this web. So it's like maneuvering along the lines, the connections between the inner and the outer experiences. That's what's synchronicity
is like the interface.
The interface, yeah.
Absolutely. It's almost like, I don't know, I was speaking to my husband about synchronicity today. It's like I call it a sticky note to stay on the path, if you will, to your spiritual growth as an individual, as a community, and at large. Do you guys also see it that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, let me give you an example, Dan. Here, we have a friend in Australia, and he bought some cards from a novelty shop about 500 things you should do in your lifetime. So he lays them out, and the first card he draws is drive a forklift. Well, now, first of all, that's a weird thing that they've included in this. Why should that be one of the 500 things you do in your life? So for him, it was particularly meaningful, though, because that's what he'd been doing for the last 23 years.
Yeah,
driving a forklift.
He looked at that card and laughed and said, "Well, I'll get through that one next Monday." But
then he subsequently lost his job, so it became truly significant. It was like the universe was saying to him, "Really, you want to keep doing this for the next 23 years, a job you hate?"
Yeah, and that's what he had said when he wrote us about that. And then a few weeks later, he said he lost a job, but he was thankful for it because he didn't have the nerve to quit himself, but circumstances with the business meant his job ended. So that it all kind of fit together for him.
Absolutely, indeed. And I'm wondering if, when we talk about synchronicity and growth and staying on the right path, can one intentionally create synchronicity within a reality? Or is it, I don't know, when I talk about synchronicity, it's like this being onto itself. It's almost like the watcher. I don't know how to really explain that properly, but that's what it feels like to me, like this separate entity, if you will, beyond consciousness that keeps us on the road of certain elements of reality.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we can create synchronicity, because if we were creating it, then that would be sort of like cause and effect, which wouldn't be synchronicity. However, what we can do is become more aware of it, consciously aware of these things happening, rather than just let them pass by without noting them. A lot of people, when we explain and talk about synchronicity, they realize, well, I've probably had hundreds of these and I just never paid any attention to them. And there's a quote by Carl Jung that addresses this. It's, synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. And this really
it addresses awareness,
right? And the subjective nature of synchronicity, because you can, if it's just some coincidence that to you that's not you don't give it any meaning, then it's not a synchronicity. If you don't recognize coincidence as meaningful, it's not synchronicity.
No, you're absolutely.
I think more and more people are becoming aware of synchronicity and, living by synchronicities as signs, as guideposts in their life.
Now, a lot of times, just because they're guideposts, though, a lot of times you don't understand the significance until sometime later. For instance, we had an experience in 2009. We had driven across the state to take our daughter back to college. And on the way home, there's a section of the highway where these swallows just sweep across the highway again and again. It does, catching mosquitoes and stuff. Well, two of them hit our windshield. We thought, okay, this can't be a good thing, but we didn't have any idea what it was about. Okay, first of all, swallows are like aerialists. Okay, just keep that in mind. 11 days later, we met our daughter halfway across the state so that she could do a tandem skydive with an instructor. Okay, tandem, that means two. So 2 swallows, 2 people skydiving. It was supposed to be at 12:30, but it was at 2 p.m., another 2. It was her 20th birthday. This was her gift from us for her 20th birthday. So she gets out of there. They go up in the plane, and there are only 2 tandem divers, and they go out last. As Megan and her instructor are free-falling, her chute doesn't open. And now in tandem dives, I guess in most dives, you always have a backup chute. And the second chute opened, and that enabled her to land safely. So look at all the 2s. They're, 11 days earlier, 1 and 1, 2 swallows, a tandem skydive, 2 p.m., her 20th birthday, and it was the second chute that enabled them to land safely.
It's definitely a numbers synchro.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to go back to what I said before about synchronicity being this entity onto itself. It's almost to me like a planted program. Now, what I'm going to say may sound crazy, but to me, this reality, the more that you wake up and you see it begins to look like this huge experiment from an outside source. It almost seems like synchronicity is like this outside program, if you will, to see if human beings or our consciousness, if you will get the memo and take on new information of wisdom. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know
I get it. I do understand. In fact, one of the places you can really see synchronicity, how prevalent it is, if you pay attention, is in mass events, things where the media is all over it and it's, broadcast 24/7. For instance, if you take the Boston Marathon, every time there's a mass event, Rob and I say, okay, there's got to be a synchro in here somewhere. And usually there is. So, okay, take the Boston Marathon. 26 is a prominent number in the marathon and in what happened. It's 26.2 miles a run. This year or last year there were more than 26,000 runners. And the oldest terrorist, the bomber, was 26 years old. And the last mile of the marathon was dedicated to the 26 victims of Sandy Hook. So there you have this strange interconnection.
That's very strange. And mind you, if you add 2 and 6, that's 8. Which is the infinity symbol. So
right.
So it makes one, I always say, even though it is a mathematical equation, it is also symbology and archetype in nature. So all of these synchros, if you will, these events are little sticky notes or little pieces of software to help the masses evolve. And it's also 3-layered because, as we were talking about before we got on air to do this recording, we are now in the essence of Saturn and Scorpio, which we know that Saturn is the teacher and Scorpio brings all of the darkness, all of the mucky muck to the surface. So you have, individuals learning about themselves and coming together, their families, the wider community at large. And I was in New York. You to also talk about 9/11, and I'm going to equate this to New York as well. The synchronicity of that and the evolvement of that was so profound. There are 3 layers of reality that were being, fixed and rearranged based upon this 911 synchronicity. And it seems like it's increasing as the year goes along. Do you guys find that as well?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. The 911, there are so many synchronicities related to that whole experience. So many people had precognitive dreams of the Twin Towers coming down, or in various different modes. Some of it symbolic, but there's been, over the years, there's been so many stories collected about people who were somehow triggered in advance.
And that's why a lot of people didn't show up for work that day.
Yeah. And, you're saying this time is bringing all this muckety-muck stuff to the surface. And I mean, another one is Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and Aurora, Colorado. 2 mass murders, 5 months apart, 1,800 miles apart. And, they both obviously attracted widespread attention, emotional reactions, and a heated debate over gun control. So it wasn't surprising that their synchronicities occurred in those 2 tragedies. And this case, the synchronicities between those 2 mass killings were documented right on film, on the movie The Dark Knight Rises, the Batman movie that was playing in the theater in Aurora. And the name Aurora actually appears in the movie. It's seen on the top of a skyscraper in the backdrop of a scene, and also Sandy Hook is also seen on a map in The Dark Knight Rises. So both names come together right there. And then
there was a synchronicity of just the movie itself, The Dark Knight Rises. The trailer before the movie even started was Gangster Squad, which they showed. It was a group of gangsters coming through a movie screen and opening fire on a crowd. That's exactly what happened, except he didn't come.
It was about a shooting in a theater. And so some people were thinking that when this guy appeared and started shooting, that it was just some kind of gimmick because it was the opening night of the movie, and they just were watching fascination, then realized that this was real.
Oh, you guys are opening up a can of worms. The media, when you talk about the media and you talk about these movies and 9/11, there were many synchronicities in movies with the Twin Towers coming down. I mean, you quote them as colossal coincidences. Talk a little bit more about that, because we see that all the time. I see tons of synchronicities in reference to the outside world of reality.
Well, I mean, probably one of the best examples other than 9/11 was the Titanic. Then again, and that was in the days before there was, television, internet, and all the other stuff. But it was such a huge thing, the sinking of the Titanic, that there were tons of synchros involving that.
In fact, there was one that actually started 14 years before the Titanic went down. It was related to a novel called Futility, or it's also called The Wreck of the Titan. It was by an author, Morgan Robertson. It's published in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic went on set off on its doomed voyage. And so Robertson wrote about the maiden voyage of a transatlantic luxury liner called the Titan. And like the Titanic, it was reputedly unsinkable. Both sank in the North Atlantic in the month of April. Both fiction and the actual Titanic were of British nationality. Both were described as unsinkable, as I said. Both were on their maiden voyages, and both were the world's largest luxury liners at the time. The Titanic was 882 feet long. The Titan was 800 feet long, and both had insufficient lifeboats for everybody on board. The Titanic had 20 lifeboats. The Titan had 24. Both sank near midnight. Both had a capacity for 3,000 passengers. The Titanic had 2,228 passengers on board, and the Titan had 3,000 on board.
It just goes on and on this. There's just dozens of parallels.
Both ships the impact with the iceberg was the starboard side. And both had 3 propellers. The Titanic speed was 22 at impact was 22.5 knots, and the Titan's was 25 knots. Just so much similarities. It's just incredible.
And this kind of relates back to one of the things we talked about in 7 Secrets of Synchronicity, which is through the creative process, we often tap in to this collective knowledge. So maybe this Morganson, who wrote this Wreck of the Titan, was actually tapping into a future event.
And so are a lot of the potential passengers, because 800 people decided to not go on that ship on that maiden voyage. And it wasn't because of change in their own plans, but that they sensed something was wrong.
Actually, it was 899.
Yeah.
Closer to 900.
Right. They sensed something was not, that the ship was going to go down or something would happen, and they changed their minds about going on it.
It makes me wonder if synchronicity is part of a time slip into the Akashic records of a particular timeline of the past, the future, and so on and so forth. What do you all think of that?
That's an interesting idea. That's certainly possible. It certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah. And this is something that writers tune into, like Morgan Robertson. He seemed to maybe tune into something like the Akashic record for his story. There's another great story that about a character named and a person named Richard Parker. And this happened in the spring of 1974. Arthur Kessler, who is the author of one of the first books, I think the first book I ever read on synchronicity is called The Roots of Coincidence. It's a great little book. And he sponsored a contest in coordination with the London Times to find the best coincidence. So 12-year-old Nigel Parker submitted this incredible coincidence that not only won the prize, but Kessler called it the best coincidence ever. And Nigel's story is about a relative of his who survived a shipwreck again, only to become a victim of cannibalism. 17-year-old Richard Parker boarded the Mignonette in Southampton, England in July of 1884, and set off on his first voyage on the high seas. So as the ship reached the South Atlantic, it was pummeled by a hurricane and sank, and there were 4 survivors, including the cabin boy, Richard Parker. They had a few provisions on their lifeboat, but after 19 days, just adrift, they're growing desperate. So the men discussed drawing lots to choose a victim who would be eaten by the others. But then before they did that, they settled on Parker because he had become delirious from drinking seawater. So the remaining crew, the survivors, lived on Parker's carcass for 37 years and 37 days until they were rescued oddly enough, by the SS Montezuma, aptly named for the cannibal king of the Aztecs. So the particular story from young Nigel's family history became incredibly stranger when Nigel learned that Edgar Allan Poe's unfinished sea adventure novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, P-Y-M, published in 1837. In one scene, 3 men and a 16-year-old boy, a cabin boy, are adrift at sea in a lifeboat after being shipwrecked. And despite being on the brink of starvation, they decided to draw lots to see which one would be eaten. And the cabin boy, what was his name? Richard Parker. He picks the dreaded short straw and is promptly killed and eaten. Same age, same position, cabin boy, same situation. And the novel was written 47 years before the true story of the cannibalism occurred.
I don't even, that's very weird, and I don't even know what to say to that. It's just, oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. That's colossal. And it's a colossal, synchronicity. And speaking of colossal, what are the differences between an individual synchronicity and a colossal? It seems like when people have colossal synchronicities, meaning 9/11, these huge events, that it's coupled with deja vu, precognition, and things of this nature.
So your question is, well, okay, on a personal level, people can also have colossal coincidences, that somehow impacts their life in such a powerful way that their life path is altered.
But on these colossal events, it's just something that it draws a lot more people into the same scenario, into the same situation, and it just reflects a monumental event taking place, and it's this whole Indra's net, this connection, one tug on Indra's net ripples throughout the universe, throughout the net.
How do you think, because we're all connected, we're all a part of the Akashic record, how do you think synchronicity, deja vu, precognition, dreams are all connected to the essence of synchronicity? I mean, how does it all play in together?
Well, I think synchronicity is the most conscious aspect of all of these different things. And when you get into the paranormal, I mean, Jung lumped them all under the umbrella of synchronicity because basically they're unknown, and there doesn't appear to be any cause and effect. When you have a precognitive dream that happens 2 years later or whatever, how did you know? How did your mind know?
Now, some people, especially psychics, don't like to think of synchronicity as the nature of of their experiences of precognition or clairvoyance, because they think, well, you're telling them that all that they're seeing is just a coincidence, which is not the case at all. It's just that what's happening with precognition and clairvoyance is that there's no cause and effect factor, that their inner experience is reflected in an outer experience that they're seeing, that they're talking about. We were talking about that what was I lost my thread. The 26-mile Boston Marathon, right? There was a South African woman who wrote about her experience. She dreamed, her name was Nerissa Pillay. She dreamed she was at an event at a stadium with crowds of people outside, and a bomb exploded and people started running and screaming, and then she heard a second bomb go off. And in this dream, she found herself in a hotel asking the person at the reception desk if he knew what number her room was. And he kept saying, the number kept going, 141, 141, 141. And so she wakes up in the morning, and that's when she finds out her husband has forwarded her an email about the Boston Marathon bombing, and there were 2 bombs. And at that time, there were 141 casualties, or a number very close to that. So, and it was a sporting event, and people were running into hotels.
How could she, a woman in South Africa, have this incredible dream about an event in Boston?
She was basically sleeping when this was happening.
Wow.
I know, some of these, that's all you can say is, oh wow, we sound like Stephen Jobs on his deathbed.
But then, I mean, it's like, what can you say to that? It's just, you can't say anything. It's literally, it's mind blowing, and it makes you say, and ponder. So many things to say to that, but not to say to that, if you will. It opens up a whole new world, if you will, when it talks about connection. Now, what do you say to the skeptics? People are like, oh, it's just a coincidence. It doesn't mean anything. Well, what is the skeptic's point of view when it comes to this whole synchronicity thing?
I don't even try to talk to skeptics. Because you're not going to change their mind. What I do, we have neighbors, for instance, who have 2 young kids. So when 7 Secrets came out, I gave her a copy of the book, and she started reading it, and she said, oh my gosh, Trish, I have so many of these. Again, somebody who knew she had tons of coincidences, but had never attached significance to them. So she's also an identical twin. So one night we were all sitting outside, and Matt and Janet start telling us their telepathic connection stories, their synchronicities. And their kids are sitting around who were at that time were like, I don't know, 5 and 8, something like that. So the kids became aware of synchronicity. So skip ahead a few years. Dawson, the boy, wanted a koi pond in his backyard. And his mom said, Annette said, no, we're not going to spend money on that right now. It's something you and your grandfather can build together when he comes to visit. So then they had to go to Lowe's for something. And as they walk in, the first thing they see is a koi pond kit. So Dawson, who was 9 or 10 at the time, says, Mom, it's a synchronicity. We have to get this koi pond. So, I mean, here's a kid who was trying to convince his mother that synchronicity meant they had to have this koi pond. So Annette said, no, we're not going to buy it, blah, blah, blah. So they come home, and the kids went down to one of the canals to see if they could catch some fish. And what did they find in a driveway of one of the abandoned houses? A koi pond. Somebody had left it by the side of the road to be taken off by the garbage trucks. So they brought it home and rebuilt it, and now he has a koi pond.
But what the skeptics would say about that is, look at all the times when there wasn't any koi pond, or there wasn't anything there, that you're only focusing on when there is a synchronicity. You're not focusing on, you don't notice it, you're not noticing all these other things that take place. So, in fact, we have a story somewhat similar to this about a skeptic and author who was at a conference in somewhere across, I think he's from New York, and he was at a conference in, I think, Seattle, I think it was, and he goes out from his hotel, walks down the street to a restaurant, gets a table at the window, and a couple minutes later, a man walks by and stops and looks at him. He looks familiar, and then the man comes in and says, "Hey, how are you doing?" And at first, the writer doesn't recognize him. Then the man reminds him, "Hey, I'm your literary agent." And of course, he's very embarrassed that he doesn't recognize his agent. And it was quite and he was here in the city for a different reason completely. And so it was quite a synchronicity, actually. But he's a skeptic. He doesn't believe in these things. So he talks about how all the other times when nothing happened. And he said everybody overlooks the times when nothing happens. But that's a silly argument. Of course, is there supposed to be synchronicities at every moment in your life? I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it's the uniqueness of these events that make them really significant.
He was so befuddled that's why he forgot his agent's name. He didn't recognize the guy,
Indeed,
and he said it would have been more.
No, go ahead, Rob.
He said it would have been more. It might have been something more interesting is if he had predicted that the agent would walk down the street and come in to the restaurant. But so he's doubling down. He doesn't. He's not just accepting the synchronicity. He wants a precognition and a synchronicity at the same time. So it's just his way of compensating, trying to talk his way out of this synchronicity.
I mean, I feel sorry for skeptics because they're missing a whole venue, that could open to them, a whole richness.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Trish, because as you were telling that story, Rob, I was thinking about how as a society and individuals and our identities coming in contact with the ambassadors of the hegemony, meaning mainstream society of blindness, we get programmed and indoctrinated our consciousness to believe that only one reality exists and that nothing else exists, that the reality that man created is the only real of what is, and that is so not true of nature. So we go into defense mode and mechanisms to defend our way of thinking so we can be what we have been programmed to be from the larger masses of society. Because let's remember, when one gets faced with truth, we have to change our whole reality and way of being. We have to change our associations. And that scares the hell out of a lot of people.
Right.
A hell of a lot of people. And that's what's happening now, if you will. And that's why I asked you at the beginning about the increase of synchronicity. It's almost like we're in this time warp, if you will. The past and the future and every gray area in between is bringing everything to the forefront, so we pay attention to all the synchronicity sticky notes in order for us to evolve. Because, when the universe does something and forces us to do it, it ain't cute. Your hair gets messed up. You miss an eyeball. You looking like one-legged Willie. This is just what it is, So I feel sorry for people that think in that framework as well.
Right. I mean, because if you really explain these synchronicities, they're very hard to. Or just tell a synchronicity, they're very hard to explain away for these people, and I think they're realizing that, and they're having trouble with that. And one question that people have asked us is, they ask us, what is the most interesting, unusual synchronicity that you've had in your life? And we had to think about that, but there's one that stands out for me because it's a travel synchronicity. The first chapter of our new book, Synchronicity Highway, talks about travel, and when you're away from your everyday life, all the comforts of your home, your refrigerator full of food, and
your pillow,
then things happen to you, and these meaningful coincidences occur at a much more rapid rate, I believe. And so we were traveling in Venezuela, and when this one happened to us, it was at a time when the drug trade from Colombia to Miami was being shifted through Venezuela because there's a crackdown in maybe Bogota or wherever. So the drugs were being shifted to Caracas. We were on our way at the airport, on our way home, and we come up with our luggage to be inspected. In front of us is a tall man wearing a three-piece suit, and he only had a briefcase in hand. And around us, you have to see this picture, are like 4 or 5 men with machine guns and watching everybody very closely. And so they point to him and they say, open it up. And so he lays the briefcase on the counter, unlocks it, unlatches it.
The atmosphere was really tense.
It's tense in there. And then he lifts the cover up, and everybody leans over with these machine guns, and we lean over and look into there, and there's only one thing in that briefcase, and it's a book called Fevered, written by Trish, who was standing behind the guy.
But it was written under a pseudonym, so even if I wanted to say, hey, I wrote that book, I didn't have any proof.
But it wasn't a situation where you'd want to even say that because of we just looked, we didn't say anything to him, but
the title just reflected
the atmosphere.
Situation.
And it was so unusual that I just couldn't believe it. I stared at that. How could the only thing in this briefcase be a book written by Trish?
Who
was that guy?
What other travel synchronicities have you all had? I've heard of people, there's a famous movie, of course, where these kids they're about to get on the plane, and someone has precognition and actually sees the plane blowing up, and the kids don't get on the plane. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie, connecting media with synchronicity.
That's a perfect example of precognition.
Yeah. And another type of travel synchronicity is when you're spending some time moving about and not just going to one place and then coming home, but traveling from place to place on a longer trip. it's so astonishing running into the same people over and over again. That happened to me. I spent 6 months in Europe and North Africa, and that would happen over and over again. There was one guy in Maury that I met. I didn't have anything in common with the guy, but every town I went to, there he was, and I moved from Spain to Morocco, there he was again. And I was with a friend traveling, and once we got into Morocco, the whole world changes, because suddenly you don't know or we didn't know Arabic, so we couldn't read the signs. And it seemed like just the atmosphere, the characteristics of the people, it seems like they're all arguing to us, which is just the nature of their disposition, but they're not really arguing. And the music is really loud in this little closed-in bus we get into, and we find a seat, sit down, and we look around. And it's all these men in jalabas with these long robes with the hoods pulled up. And then like 3 rows in front of us, we look and we see a couple Western people. And who is it? But my friend, his nickname is Rabbit, the only other person he knew who was traveling overseas at the time was a friend of his who he thought was in Sweden. He's sitting on that bus 2 or 3 rows in front of us, and next to him is Maury, the guy we could see everywhere we went in Spain. So it's just crazy.
Do you think that when people, it's interesting, that's happened to me traveling and seeing people, if you will, what do you think the gifts are that it's exchanged when we have synchronicity with individuals such as that? Because I believe that all of us carry an element of medicine. My grandmother used to say that never go out into the world when you're sad or anything and not smile. Always have a smile on your face, because there could be a synchronicity where you come in contact with another human being purposefully through synchronicity and literally save their life. They could literally not commit suicide or things of this nature because you smiled at them or you gave them a gentle gesture. Have you received any gifts from all of these people that you see in a multitude of times?
That's an interesting, I like your way of looking at it, receiving gifts. Trying to remember if in this book we have anything comparable to that. Yeah. I think we did in 7 Secrets. It's hard. I'm telling you, Dio, we've had so many synchronicities and we've gathered so many of them. Sometimes it's hard to remember. Trying to think. I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, it's a gift just to have these experiences when you recognize synchronicity happening over. You're on the trail. You're on the right path, and it's a sense of guidance.
Now, here's a strange story. When I lived in college, my roommate was from a nearby town, and her grandmother lived in this rambling old house on the Hudson, and she was a seamstress. So my friend and I had this very small apartment in Utica, New York, little attic apartment, and we started finding straight pins around the house. Now, neither one of us sewed. And within a few days, her grandmother passed away, and we started finding more straight pins. So my roommate, Linda, mentioned this to her mother, and she says, oh, yeah, Nana G's around. I've even found passages in the Bible underlying straight pins. And on her grave, there was a straight pin. So 10 or 15 years after this, eventually we stopped finding these straight pins, but 10 or 15 years later, the 3 of us were at that Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine. Now, that place is it's an old fort. It's just stone and empty. Okay, it's old. And we were walking through, and I happened to look down, and there's a straight pin. So I picked it up, and I showed it to Linda and her mother, and I said, Nana G's here. And her mother says, yep, I knew she was around. I just felt it. And I said, but what are the odds? A straight pin in this old castle? So to me, that was like a spirit contact thing.
What do you guys have other stories that talk about synchronicity? And that sounds like a synchronicity in the dead type of story. And I know millions of people have synchronicities with the dead.
There's some very, one of the men we write about in this book, Mike Perry, who's a blogger in the UK, who writes about synchronicity. One of the things I first became aware that one of the ways the dead communicate is through white feathers. And I first read about this on Mike's blog, and it's incredibly moving. You know, somebody who has just lost a loved one, and suddenly white feathers start showing up in the oddest places, on the doorstep, in a mailbox, on the kitchen table. That's another form of spirit communication.
And if we can move into the area of alien contact, then again, there seems to be some connection between aliens and the dead as well. There's a lot of people who have had these abduction experiences or contact experiences, encounters, have seen these beings with someone who they know from the past who is gone. And so it seems like maybe for these beings who could be not from another distant planet in our universe, but from another dimension, maybe they have access or are from the dimension where souls are and the dead, and to them, these people who would be dead to us are not dead at all. It's a fascinating thing. Whitley Strieber has written about this, and we has talked about it as well. That he's had these experiences with the dead and the alien contact, and there's also we also write about in that third part of the book about UFOs being sighted over graveyards repeatedly, and that's a very odd thing. In fact,
graveyards, portals.
Yeah, maybe they're interdimensional portals. In this one particular case, a man in Tennessee, in a small town Tennessee, heard some strange kind of squealing noises, and about 2:00 in the morning, and it was on a night of an eclipse. And so he got up and walked outside and looked up, and he sees what looks like...
No, it wasn't an eclipse. It was a super full moon.
Super full moon. That's what it was. Right. Yeah. Okay, so he looks up and he sees a V-shaped formation of lights, and with something very bright behind it, and he thinks that's the moon. What's this V-shaped thing in front of it? And then whatever it was vanishes, and all he sees is the V-shaped lights, and he turns his head and looks in the other direction, and he sees the moon. So he knows that wasn't the moon. But what is he looking at? This thing is moving along, and he starts following it, walking, is moving slowly, and he walks over to this ridge on his edge of his property that drops down to a graveyard. And this craft, or whatever it was, beams down a red light right onto one of the gravestones. And so he's very frightened, because he's thinking that this is might be some kind of death beam or something, and if they see him, he's in trouble. So he hurries. In fact, at first he can't even move. He's like paralyzed. But finally, the vessel moves on, and he's able to go back into his house. And the next morning he gets up and walks around, or drives around, whatever, and gets down to where the graveyard is, and he finds the gravestone. And it's... he
finds the gravestone that the beam was focused on. Yeah,
where the beam was focused. And it's actually 3 different graves together, and all these people are Masons, which was very interesting. And so he told his mother about that, because she's a 33-degree Mason herself. So, and it's something that has been in the family, their history. So that's and Whitley. We told that story when we were on Unknown Country, and he was fascinated by that one with the Mason connection.
Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't surprise me, but it does not, because the Masons and all of those other folks out there who are in secret society, if you will, are magicians. They're alchemists. And, 3 is a very powerful number, if you will, when it comes to the gatekeeper of portals. When you talk about portals, you deal with the essence of numerology with 3, 3, 6, 9, and things of this nature. When you deal with mediums, they know, well, from my understanding, they know that 3 is very much a portal number in nature. So, what you're telling me does not really surprise me, and it doesn't surprise me as well about the whole aspect of the graveyard, because let's face it, this is a shell. If you will. This is only one form of reality, and there is another form of self within this shell called, the key of the spirit, our spirit. So that's very fascinating, because this is just my perspective, that if these beings have a higher frequency, if you will, it would only make sense that they go pick up our friend, the other part of us, the higher frequency of us, and go hang out. And this is why, to me, when people talk about the dream time and them seeing beings of this nature in the dream time and in that other reality, that also makes sense, because the dream time is a form of death. If you really get down to the nitty-gritty, we're dead when we're sleeping. We're finito. There's nothing there. Our consciousness is not functioning. We're outside of our body. So it is a form of living death. So to me, at a higher frequency, but that's just my perspective. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world. Or maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know.
No. It makes sense. Well, I think we're all crazy.
Indeed.
We definitely don't have the consensus reality viewpoint. But I think that's changing. I do think we're reaching a tipping point where more and more people are waking up.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. With everything is peeling back like an onion. And it's just so in time that you guys write this book on the highway, and I say again, the super highway of synchronicity, because this is happening more and more. And I actually did the numerology with the cipher from a wonderful I call him a spiritual mathematician, Marty Leeds, who's another wonderful author who decodes with the essence of numbers. Ironically, synchronicity is the numerology of 3. What a coincidence.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. Hey. And there are 13 letters in the word synchronicity. If you add that up, it is 4, which is a square, which deals with a piece of software, from my perspective, of Earth. So you have the square and you have the triangle, which is heavenly in nature, the trinity of the known and unknown. Need I say any more? Y'all can read between the lines, and I know the family can, because they're metaphysicians out there. But synchronicity seems to be a spiritual software that is running on the ever-present increase, because as a community, as individuals, we need to really wake up, or we're going to destroy ourselves, literally. What is your perspective on that, you all?
Yeah, I think everybody, if you remember last year, was talking about, oh my gosh, 2012 is going to be the end of the world. Mm-hmm. Well, and it wasn't. We're still here. But something did shift. And I don't know if it's the time is speeding up or consciousness is speeding up. There's a momentum. That's what I feel. There's a momentum building towards something.
That's something that's going on, and that there's no one particular date like December 21st, 2012, where everything switches like a light switch being turned off or on. It's something more gradual, but something that's building and happening.
No, you're absolutely You're right. We shall see. And another thing another synchronicity that I find to be quite interesting, because I know you guys have had this experience as well, is numbers. 1111, 444, 222. What is that all about? I see 1111 all the time. I see 2s and 5s all the time. Do you have some insight on that? I would really love to hear it, because I have this experience all the time.
Well, one of the things Carl Jung said, he said numbers are archetypes. So when you see repetition of numbers like that, it means that particular archetype has become active within your psyche. So, and then you can take it a step farther. For a while after Aliens in the Backyard came out, I would always seem to be looking at my clock or my iPad or something at 4:44. I thought, well, that's weird. I mean, this happened quite a bit, probably a dozen times. And so I mentioned it to Rob, and I said, I don't know what this means, but something's revolving around this 444. So a couple of weeks after the book came out, we got a phone call or not a phone call, it was an email from a guy who was a consultant for the History Channel, and he was interested in talking to us about Aliens in the Backyard and how it might translate for television. So when we eventually had our phone call, he said, the synchronicity stuff's pretty interesting. He said, and these repeating numbers, he goes, that's really fascinating. He says, in fact, I've had repeating numbers for weeks now. And I said, what are they? And he said, 444. So I thought, okay, so this means, that the 444 I kept seeing was probably related to his interest in the book. Now, interestingly enough, after, what was finally decided was that he didn't think anything could be done with it for the History Channel. And after that, I stopped seeing 444.
Yeah, there are people from the History Channel involved. It was like 3 parties involved, and they were tied up with some other things and said couldn't do anything right now. And so that ended the conversation, and that ended
the 444.
The 444 is fascinating.
It is
something.
Indeed, it's very fascinating. And speaking about aliens, and I'm just going to say what it is. I perceive that there are many types of beings here looking at the experiment. I even perceive that they are a part of the software of synchronicity, because the way that I feel about synchronicity is that it's something inside and outside of ourselves, because it connects us with other people's situations, being at the right place at the right time. It's like its own entity of on its own. How do our friends that are not from around here tie into the essence of synchronicity?
Well, this is really interesting. Sunday, we drove halfway across the state to have lunch with a woman who we call Sandy, who has had encounters for 20 years. She's a retired veterinarian.
Yeah, she may be the subject of our next book, actually.
She's got a fascinating story.
Really fascinating stories. And what's interesting, a little different from Aliens in the Backyard, and some of the stories we also have in the Synchronicity Highway, is that her encounters are positive with these beings. She doesn't consider herself an abductee, where those two books, most of them, especially Aliens in the Backyard, we had some pretty frightening stories about what happened to some people and that really affected them. And now but we also, in the Synchronicity Highway, introduced a person who is involved in a group of experiencers, they call themselves, rather than abductees. And one chapter was an interview with him about their perspective of the whole nature of what's happening. And so now we've been put in contact with this woman who has had these years and years of unusual experiences. And interestingly, the time leading up to meeting her, we've been talking with her for about 2 months online. She's been sending us
journal entries, audio
entries, audio.
She's kept really good notes.
Right. And so like 6 weeks ago, after we had started talking to her, we had been out to dinner with a couple of friends who live about 50 miles north of us. So we met about halfway in the town of Jupiter, Florida. Interesting, it's Jupiter, because after dinner, we're driving home. It's dark out, and I see something between the trees that's a little unusual, very bright red lights, and Trish at that moment says, "What is that up there?"
And turn off.
Pull over. So I take a turn, and there's an empty lot. I pull into this empty lot, and there's already somebody stopped there, a biker on a Harley. He stopped there, and he's staring at these lights, and there are probably, 7, 8, 9 of them, and they're about the brightness of Venus, each one of them, but they're red or reddish orange. And the biker, he's just going crazy. He's talking on the cell phone with his wife, and he's saying, "Oh my God, what is it? What is it? What is it? The world will never be the same again." And we're seeing these objects up there, and they're moving around, just kind of like floating around. And it's hard to say how far away they are, how large they are. And we're just fascinated watching these. Trying
to take pictures, it was impossible.
Yeah, well, we did get a couple. The biker sent. He got some good pictures and sent them to us, and we showed them in a blog post. And so what happens is the lights start changing colors from reddish orange to white, and then they shrink and vanish one after another, and then they were all gone. It was an amazing experience. We have no idea what it was we were looking at.
But when I had mentioned this to the veterinarian in an email, and, telling her about the timing, then it was just a couple days later that she got in touch with us. And then the night before we're going to drive across the state to have lunch with her, we're also headed across town to meet somebody else for dinner. And it was overcast and close to sunset. And all of a sudden Rob says, "Wow, what's that thing up there?" And about 100 feet up, there's what looks like a street light, but it's bright.
It's about the size of a street light, but very bright, and it's zipping across the road, making a sharp turn, hovering, and moving around. And Trish says, pull over. But there was 3 lanes of traffic, a lot of traffic, and I'm in the middle lane, and we're also late for dinner for meeting somebody, and so we can't do it. But
again, this is only 100 feet up.
It wasn't a large object. We know that. It wasn't an airplane.
It wasn't a drone, a model airplane.
It was just very bright. It had its own illumination. And so for us, it was synchronicity, because that was the evening before we were going to drive across and meet this woman. I don't know if Trish had mentioned, but she was a veterinarian, so she has some background in science, and she was actually an animal researcher as well, and she has stories about that too. But these beings that she encounters,
she consciously works with them.
Right, and they're not grays either. They're different looking beings. There's a number of different races. So you're right. It's not just these little grays that are in the popular imagination. There's others out there, and some of them are a little more shy than these grays, or they are maybe helping us and beneficial, but they're not trying to affect change us either in any way, except for the better, without coming in and acting like when Western culture moved into Native American primitive cultures and destroyed the Native American cultures. They're not trying to come in with trinkets for us and to save us or to take control of us in that way.
And she, interestingly enough, she feels that these entities generate synchronicities.
So do I.
At least in her life. Well, see, there's now we got, okay. Yeah, and she says that it's like over the course of these 20 years that she's been having these experiences, she always has the choice of whether or not to follow the synchronicity, to follow the guidance or whatever it is. But when you do that, just because you have a synchronicity, it doesn't mean you it doesn't confirm a decision, or it doesn't say you must do it this way, because we always have free will. But she says she feels that the synchronicities that have been so important in her life have been generated by these beings, and yet the bottom line is she always has the choice of whether or not to follow it.
This is what I'm glad you said that, and let me clarify what I mean when I say that. Synchronicities and the strangeness of consciousness and all its idiosyncrasies remind me of the Adjustment Bureau by Philip K. Dick. This is what synchronicity reminds me of. It reminds me of the end of Men in Black, when you see, and I can't remember which one, when you see the huge aliens playing, marbles with all of these different worlds, and they're looking down on it. That's what I feel like synchronicity is. It's like they're looking at us as individuals, as groups of people, who's conscious, who's not, okay, this and that, and then they throw in the memo of the synchronicity in order to peel back the layer of the onion to decipher who's going to get this information and who's going to do this and that and the other, if you will, because I perceive in things of this nature, and I know that I've talked to other people who are very intuitive in nature. There's a lot of craziness unseen and seen on planet Earth, and many weird synchronicities going on for, I don't know, information to be handed over, if you will, to the new guard, or things of this nature, or maybe even disclosure. Maybe I'm crazy, I don't know, but that's what I feel. Do you guys feel like that too, that something of that nature is going to be revealed? It's bigger than us. That's how I feel.
Yeah, it could be disclosure, but where's the disclosure coming from? It's not coming from the government. They're not going to do anything. Even though there may be groups that know about this stuff, and they're probably outsourced. They've probably been outsourced for a few decades now, and they're not people even in the government, but associated with the government. They're not going to do it. It's going to come from the beings themselves, the entities. They are the ones who must make the choice that we're ready for disclosure, for full recognition that we're not the only intelligent beings in the universe, that we know this, but even though yet science, mainstream science, there's a whole legion of people who think that maybe we are there's no scientific proof that that there anyone else that does exist. So what's the rest of the universe all about? God was kind of wasting his time if we're the only intelligent beings, and the vastness of other planets and suns and everything. It's crazy, that concept. I mean,
even this retired veterinarian was saying that I asked her, I said, well, what do you feel the agenda is of these entities, these energies you're working with? And she said, it's about evolution. She said, humanity has to evolve.
That's it, yeah. And as we do so, I think there's going to be contact and maybe some connection with a galactic community. It's just that we want to be equal partners and not
slaves,
not enslaved.
No, you're absolutely right. And everyone that I speak to feels like we're on the precipice of something. Synchronicity has increased. The research for consciousness, like what is going on? What does this all mean? Why and does this and deja vu and life after? Why are all these things happening? How can we? I don't know if cracking the code is the right word. But we're like right on the edge of something. And granted, there is a socialized program, I think, from mainstream and some quote unquote new agers that is not all that good in nature. But underneath that, there is something bubbling up to the surface. What that is, like you said, don't know. But it's bigger than actually planet Earth. And that's the only way that I can really describe it. It's the weirdness continues.
Right.
Yeah. And it's worldwide too. I mean, there's some very fascinating stories about UFO encounters that I've been reading about them in Turkey. Incredible photographs with mass sightings there. I mean, the mass media doesn't tell us about this, but there's been some very unusual experiences there. And Brazil, there's a documentary out on this. Not just a sighting in Brazil, but a crash where the alien beings escaped and were seen by people moving around the city and being captured. And now the government comes in and people are just putting up a big cover story that these were midgets that were running around. It's crazy, but there's just this documentary was so well done, and it talked to so many people who had the sightings, and then the government and also the government people who had these crazy explanations for what was going on. It's
it goes back to the old swamp gas thing. Swamp gas, Chinese lanterns.
Yes, indeedy. Yes, it does. Very much so. Wow, there's so much to talk about, my friends, when it comes to this book. In the essence of synchronicity. And we're going to have you back, but I do want to ask you another question because it's all tied together. It seems like, the environment is awakening up. I'm trying to use the right word, like communication is being opened up on so many different levels with the beings that are here and also with nature itself. I cannot begin to tell you how many synchronicities I have had. It's like an alien force within itself with animals.
Yes.
I had 15 crows in my front yard. The other day, and it was like they needed to tell me something. An alien force within itself. I can't even get the words out because it blew my mind. And in Colorado, these crows are huge. And they were approaching me, and I'm like, oh my God, am I gonna have the scene from the birds? Like, what's going on? But there's this gentleness, and they were following me around, and I sat in my car and I'm like, wow, this is like really deep. It happened for 5 days in a row, them hanging out on the lawn, and I'm like, what is going on? So it's like we have these beings from, the ether looking down and communicating, giving pieces of software and information tied in with nature, with Mother Earth's animals and things of this nature, if that's even really, quote unquote, an animal, if you get my drift.
Right.
What's going on?
It's, there's all these signs and symbols that come through animals. Like, we had taken this trip to meet our agent down in the Florida Keys, about 14 miles north of Key West, and we got on the wrong entrance and ended up heading in the wrong direction. And every time we got off, we could only continue in the same direction. It was crazy. We went about 30 miles in the wrong direction, and we finally find a way to get back onto the turnpike and head south. And as we're doing so, here a crow flies across right in front of the car and makes a U-turn right in front of the car.
Just reflecting what we had just done.
Exactly what we had just done.
Wow.
And, I'm kind of wary when there's flocks of crows, because they're actually, crows are a group of crows. It's not called a flock. It's called a murder of crows. That's the so I'm kind of cautious when I see a bunch of crows together.
Well, let me tell
you. Did anything happen after you saw these crows?
Well, they stayed and they chilled out, and then they flew away. But it was like, and at first I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, okay, I know I didn't have a glass of wine. I don't drink. I'm good. And it freaked me out. I was like, I commune with nature often, but unfortunately, we have these indoctrinating programs of certain animals and things of this nature. And like I said, Alfred Hitchcock, I thought I was going to be attacked. But the energy that they were giving me was so gentle in nature. And they were trying to get my attention. They were like, pay attention to me. And this has happened more than once. So most definitely something is happening in the area of communication. We just have to pay attention. And I'm still, like you said at the beginning of the recording, we don't always get the answer right away. Right. And I'm just sitting back and flowing with the universe and waiting to receive the information. But I know that that's significant in nature because I've been where I've been at for a while. But this is just recently happening. And every time this happens and they see me, they're like, hello, are you paying attention? We're going to give you some information. So I'm just waiting to see what happens, you all.
Well, you know, a lot of times too, especially with birds, it's helpful to look into the animals' habits, you know, their life cycle, that kind of thing, because sometimes you'll find a timing element in that.
Absolutely. But the message that I received was to wait and we will come visit you again. I'm like, okay, I know I'm not nutty. I'm just going to sit back and wait. I know that the crow is very symbolic in nature when it comes to prophecy, when it comes to basically being the birds and the gatekeepers of the underworld, right, if you will. So, you know.
Also, owls are very much linked to the underworld and to death. We live in an area of South Florida here where there are burrowing owls that live underground, and they have a tough time because snakes get in there and eat the eggs and such, and they're an endangered species. But when we were living in our last house, we had a burrowing owl land on the ledge right above our doorway to the entry to the house, and it just sat there for hours. And wasn't that the day?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, and we had just returned from New York, where we had seen our agent and publisher, and we had also seen our friend, we used to call him the Fizz, Richard Damian. And he was a psychic, really interesting guy. And we had seen him, so I guess we've been home for about 2 days. And this owl, we kept thinking, okay, this is not good. It's just sitting here. And that evening we got a call from the Fizz's sister that he had passed away.
Yeah,
so, I mean, in Native American mythology, this is what owls do. They transmit messages between the living and the dead and the living.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbology, mythology with owls, not only related to the underworld and death, but also related to alien contact as well.
Absolutely. You know, the owl, the crow, keepers, I say, of the seen and the unseen, can be very profound in nature. You know, after I dealt with our little crow friends, having a lot of activity in the dream time, if you will. You know, a lot of instances of death that I, as a human being, I'm going through a lot of growth. Humanity's going through the essence of a lot of growth and synchronicity as well. And a lot of it is going to be very, very painful, unfortunately, but this is what it takes for one to peel back the onion. Your book is very profound, you all.
Thank you.
I enjoyed myself. You have most definitely. There's so much in my head right now that I want to say, but I'm going to wait until after the holidays so we can have you back because you touched so many subjects, so many things to talk about when it comes to just this one book. But I do have to ask, where does one go from here? You said that you will be in, as Trish laughs in the background. What's happening on the next book? What are you guys going to bring to the forefront?
Well, it could be this one we're considering that is going to take a look at the other side of alien contact, the experiencer scenario rather than the abductee people, but with the recognition that there is two sides. I mean, some of these experiencers just think that it's all good and wonderful, and that if there's anything about abductions, it must be the military or the government doing these abductions. We don't go for that. I think that there's multiple races that are here, and just like humans, that they have many different personalities, attitudes, and intentions. But we want to take a look at that more benefic side, and we're looking for a few more people to add to this scenario. And besides that, I'm involved in writing a book on meditation right now. And Trish is writing a novel.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. You'll most definitely have to come back and talk about your novel and your meditation book, Rob, and the other side of our friends that do not reside here, because we know what the negative is, but I also think that there's two sides of the coin, and that there's energy here that is very enlightening and is helping individuals, if you will, open up the essence of their DNA. I mean, there are just so many questions, y'all. We only use 10% of our brain capacity. We have 24 strands of DNA that's not completely activated. I mean, so many questions. So let's talk about that, because there's so many places to go and things to talk about. But I thank you all for spending time with me. I don't want to be a hog, but I thank you all so much.
Thank you, dear. We enjoyed it.
Yeah, we enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I love talking to you. You are part of the H2O Network family. And as always, family, make sure that you check out the Synchronicity Highway, Exploring Coincidences. I will have all of this posted up on my Facebook page and also the H2O Network Facebook page. And you'll be able to connect with Rob and Trish MacGregor on Facebook. So make sure you come hang out with us. Thank you, family, for listening to the H2O Network. And until next time, bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye, dear.